What's up, YouTube? This is Dave's Had Enough 187. This is another video to do with UFC 204, Dan Henderson versus Michael Bisping, another UFC robbery review, and another video from Dave. And yeah, pretty much this is my review on the fight with Dan Henderson and Michael Bisping for the UFC Middleweight Championship. I'm not going to go into the rest of the fight card because this is mainly what I want to talk about. I just think it was a bunch of bullshit, and I want to give my thoughts on it. So basically, you had Dan Henderson versus Michael Bisping. This was Dan Henderson's last match, as he stated. Even after this match, he says, even though what happened, I'm done. He's not happy with what happened. He says it shouldn't be an L on his record. He has to take an L, but it is what it is. So pretty much this fight, first round, clearly Dan Henderson took him out with the overhand right, fucking laid his ass out, elbowing that motherfucker. I thought it was over. I was like, damn, he already ended him, he fucked him up. Even after the fucking, the round one, you see him walking the right side of his face when they're patching him up, he looked like he got hit by a bus. It's like, and then the second round, fucking Dan Henderson does it again, And the funny thing is, Dan Henderson's like smiling at him this whole fight. You could tell Michael Bisping is just fucking destroyed. And then when it gets into the later rounds, like I believe it was the third round, he kicked him in the nuts. Kicked him in the nuts there. Or no, it was the second. Was it the second? It was the second round he kicked him in the nuts. Believe. Quote me if I'm wrong. And that's when Dan Henderson got him again. I believe it was the overhand right. And then the third round you had, which pretty much went to Michael Bisping. The fourth round you had Michael Bisping. I believe it was the fourth round. He kicked him in the nuts, and it was the fourth round. He kicked him in the nuts. That's when he really hurt him. Where I will say Dan Henderson took advantage of that. It was either the fourth or fifth round. But then the fifth round, I believe that was the fourth. The fifth round was Dan Henderson's fight. That was it. I think Dan Henderson clearly won that. And I think from the knockdowns he got in the beginning, what he did, he had more, he took him to the ground at the end too. Had him at the ground in the beginning. No, second round he had him on the ground. Just didn't have enough time in that round to get, basically start fucking elbowing him. But that first round, I think he should just gave it all he got and just fucking just finished him. One thing I will say about Michael Bisping, even though I feel Dan Henderson was robbed, and I'll tell you why in just a second. He has good stamina. Michael Bisping, that motherfucker can go. He don't look like he's ever tired. He just does not look like he's tired. He's a decent fighter. He definitely can clearly take a beating like we've seen in this match. But I have to say, the reason this happened, why it went the way it is, if you look at it, you got Dan Henderson basically retiring. It's pretty much similar, if you think of it, to the Nate Diaz-Conor McGregor. If Nate Diaz would have won Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz too, then their golden goose is gone. Their big promoter. What kind of shit's he gonna talk after getting beat twice by Nate? They're acting like the first fucking fight didn't even happen. That's the way the UFC is. Dana White said a long time ago, my brother told me this, he saw him in an interview one time, where Dana White pretty much said, don't never let it go to the judges, which, Dan Henderson shouldn't have let it go to the judges, even though I clearly believe with him that he won. He should have just fucking gave it all he got in that first round and fucking finished him, But he was smart about it. He didn't want to use all of his fucking stamina. He's 46 fucking years old, For somebody to do that much damage to somebody at his age, that's fucking good. It fucked him up. But the thing is, like I was saying with Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz, they don't want to throw Conor McGregor away, and it's the same thing with Michael Bisping. You got Dan Henderson. If he would have got that decision like he should have, then Michael Bisping would have been thrown away, and Michael Bisping's a fan favorite. Dan Henderson is too, but for some reason at the beginning of this fight, they were booing him. But at the end, they were cheering him. I don't understand. This is how fans are. But Michael Bisping, they don't want to throw him away. They want to build him up to be this big fighter, where clearly Anderson Silva kicked his fucking ass that last fight he fought Anderson Silva. Anderson Silva fucking did the flying knee, knocked him out, thought he won himself, Dan The UFC, when it comes to decision, is a bunch of bullshit. Clearly, if you look at these fights, like I mentioned with Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz, that was Nate Diaz's fight. Look at the fight with Anderson Silva and Michael Bisping. That was fucking Anderson Silva's fight. And just like this one, I believe, when it comes down to Dan Henderson and Michael Bisping, it was fucking Dan Henderson's fight. Even he said at the end of the fight, he says, well, if they judge it by how people look, he says, I wish they would have judged it how people look. I was fucking dying laughing. See, you didn't have Michael Bisping talking all that shit at the end of the fight. He talked shit to, like, Chris Weidman and all them others that, are left in the division. But he was talking good when it came to Dan Henderson, because Dan Henderson gave him the fight of his fucking life in that fight, And the thing is, what's funny is, you got Dan Henderson that can make the post, press conference at the end. Michael Bisping, where was he? Oh, I know where he was. Rushed to the hospital. That shows how fucking corrupted the UFC is when it comes down to a decision. How does the fight, when you seen him get the belt put around his waist and he's sitting there and they're like, and still, and you're like, what the fuck? It's just ridiculous. Even Dan Henderson, he turned around, put his head down, like, what? Robbed. I'm sorry, he was robbed. In my opinion, it's because they don't want to throw away two fighters. They're losing one, they don't want to throw away two. You got to look at a lot of these divisions, especially when you look at the light heavyweight. They ain't got much in that division, Same thing with the middleweight division, really, when you look at it. There's not much there. They're going to lose Michael Bisping. And then they're going to lose Dan Henderson? Come on. It's not right. I don't think it's, right. The thing is, if you want to for sure win the fight, one thing Dan should have had, what he should have done is just got him in that first. He had it. It was there, One thing, with Michael Bisping, he has, that man could take a beating. That's one thing you could say about him. After this fight, he could take a beating. I mean, I just think that's hilarious. He's rushed to the hospital. He's the champion still, rushed to the hospital, and the fucking loser's sitting at the press conference talking about, that's his last fight. He's retiring. He's like, I don't even feel bad. He's like, he's like, I didn't feel nothing that whole fight. The only thing that bothered me was my thigh when he kicked me. I mean, other than his nuts. And that's another thing. You had Michael Bisping, kicking him in the nuts, which Dan Henderson, pretty much took advantage of, which was smart. You're going to keep kicking somebody in the nuts, I'd take advantage of that, especially at his age. But I'm telling you, in my eyes, round 1, Dan Henderson, round 2, Dan Henderson, round 3, Michael Bisping, round 4, Michael Bisping, round 5 was Dan Henderson. I'm sorry. That's bullshit. Dan Henderson was that whole match waiting just to just clip that motherfucker with the right hand. He was holding it. He was ready. And it was a good fight. I liked it. It went the distance. It was fun. I was not happy with the outcome. I'm really never happy with the outcome when it goes to decision, because it's always usually a bunch of bullshit, And, with the whole Nate Diaz and Conor McGregor, that was so disappointing when that happened. Just like this. This was very disappointing. Show the man some respect. The man built your fucking sport. Give him a good retire. Give him a good way out. He deserved it. He built the UFC to what it is today, and he gets fucking robbed by Michael Bisping. Come on. That's fucking horrible. I'd be pissed. But that's it. That was pretty much the fight. I think it was a robbery. Another robbery at hand. It is what it is. I mean, I think they need to judge the fights better. Like Dan Henderson said at the end of the fight, like I said, he said pretty much, he says, if they judge the fight by how the person looks, there might have been a different outcome. Because that's how, whenever I ever got in a fight or ever saw a fight, when you're in a fight in real life, the person looks like they got their ass kicked, they got their fucking ass kicked. The other guy's looking okay. Normally, most of the time was the winner of the fight. And I know the UFC judges by little kicks and little shit like that, but I'm telling you, this fight, you could sit there and argue with me with the Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz, but this fight right here, I'm sorry. Dan Henderson had the knockdowns. You look at who got their ass whipped when you really look down to it, who's the more bloodier one. It was like the same thing with Anderson Silva with him. He was a mess. He was a fucking mess that fight, and they give him the fight. Like, he got the flying knee in the third round, knocked his ass down. The bell saved him, but even Anderson Silva, for a second there, I even thought he won the match. I was like, they're going to continue it, but I don't know. I just think they try to build up some of these fighters more than they are. You know, you got Conor McGregor being built up to be this big fighter, and I don't think it's going to go so well when it comes down to Eddie Alvarez. I really don't. Unless they're going to start throwing fights in the UFC to build people up, you know, which wouldn't surprise me the way that it's becoming like, you know, the WWE. I mean, it could be predetermined. Who knows? You know, you never know nowadays. They'll do anything to, like, promote a fight. I will say the UFC lately is a lot of controversy, more controversy than ever. You know, it's kind of becoming the WWE. I don't mind it. I think it builds a good fight, but I wouldn't be surprised in the future you see them throwing fights to build fucking people up like Conor McGregor that, you know, if you look at a lot of his fights, they were all catered to him. What's he going to do against Eddie Alvarez if Eddie Alvarez does take him to the ground? We already saw what happens when he goes to the ground with Nate Diaz. What's going to happen if Eddie Alvarez gets him to the ground? You know, I'm sorry. When it comes to this fight and the last fights that I've watched, like the ones I talked about, I think it's bullshit. I do. But it is what it is. Michael Bisping, you know, even though he went to the hospital and he's sitting in his hospital bed most likely right now, Dan Henderson's at the house, you know, probably, you know, being with his family, watching a movie, chilling, you know, whatever. You know, he's supposedly the loser, and Michael Bisping in the hospital's the winner. That he's the champion. Come on, we all know why it went the way it did. But that's my review of the fight, guys. You know, if I maybe in future videos, like when I'm wanting to start the MMA podcast, I want to do. We'll talk more about other shit that happened in this UFC event, but mainly just wanted to cover this. You know, I thought this was what I want, you know, pretty much just want to do a video on this. I didn't want to make it any longer than I needed to. Tell me what you think in the comment section. Am I crazy? Do you think Dan Henderson, you know, pretty much lost that fight like they said? Or do you think he won like I believe? Tell me in the comment section. More videos to come. Thank you, YouTube.